everybody, John Greenwood here today with another Kriegsspiel video. Today we're going to be looking at morale under the old Prussian system and the modifications that I made to it and sort of the rationale behind the system as a whole. So there are three general categories of the morale system under Kriegsspiel. I'm just going to put a blank marker here. You'll see why in a second. So the first is what I would call the shaken system. There's no name for this under the system. It just sort of de facto exists. There is the morale state machine, that was what I like to call it. And then there's just sort of ad hoc judgment to fill in any gaps or include things that aren't included in these two. So let's look at the shaken system first because it's the shorter of the two. Basically, there's lightly shaken or heavily shaken or nothing at all. Nothing at all. You just don't mark, and then if you're lightly shaken, you mark it like that. Heavily shaken, you mark it like that. Generally, this is an ascending system, so you start with nothing, then you become lightly shaken, then you become heavily shaken. What does heavily shaken mean? This is sort of a pseudo disruption system, but they didn't have like 10 different iterations of it like the IKS tends to do now. They just had 3. Are you lightly disturbed or are you heavily disturbed? And this would encompass things like cohesion. Loss of cohesion could be represented by lightly shaken. Fatigue also was a huge thing for lightly shaken. And let me pull up some of the rules here, right? So this is sort of my English translation of, you can ignore these old symbols, I replaced them. But basically, this would apply a flat malus to your rolls when you're rolling for morale. So the old Prussian system, when 2 units get into combat, right, you start shooting each other, or maybe you get in a melee, you would roll a d6. And on this d6, lightly shaken would give you -1, and heavily shaken would give you -2. Just a flat malus. That's all. And -2 is, on 1d6, that changes your odds by 33.33 repeating %. So this is a pretty steep modifier. And below this, we can see a couple of outlier cases, fringe cases, where generally speaking, under the rules, it's as I said, right? If you get tired, you become more shaken than you were. So you enter lightly shaken or you enter heavily shaken because you're more tired, or something that obviously disrupts the unit would increase your disruption by a little bit. But there's also things like all over the rules, there's these weird edge cases. And I tried to collect them as much as I could, but it just creates like this kind of monster of a list. So I just sort of collected the most important, the most common ones. So infantry are lightly shaken after any kind of brief engagement, right? And what this means is basically like if you've got your skirmishers and they're shooting other skirmishers here, right? You got like a very brief skirmisher engagement here, and let's say these guys don't even run away. They just kind of retreat. Both of these guys would be lightly shaken, regardless of whether or not they lost the engagement. They're both lightly shaken for having taken part in it. Okay. In terms of melee, if these guys were to engage in melee, I don't know why skirmishers are engaging in melee, but hey, let's pretend. Any kind of melee with infantry is going to be heavily shaken because the rule is infantry are heavy shaken after prolonged or intense engagements, and any kind of melee at all for infantry is extremely extremely intense engagement, so they're going to be heavily shaken. Or I don't know, you're under artillery fire for 20 minutes, then you would be heavily shaken. If you're in a firefight for, I don't know, 10 minutes, 10 minutes feels like an eternity when you're getting bullets shot at you, so that would be heavily shaken as well. And you can use this as sort of an approximator for a lot of different things, so it's very versatile to use. So that's the sort of disruption shaken system under the Prussian system. It would only apply for 6 minutes, and each tick was 2 minutes. So technically speaking, after 3 turns under the rules as written, of course the Prussians tended to administrate things in 4-minute turns. So I don't know how they did that one, but anyways, that's that. We're done with those. The next thing is the morale state. So I've got all 3. Technically, there's 5 morale states. So the first morale state is of course nothing, right? Nothing. Your unit is fine. It's fresh for the purposes of gameplay. Then there is repulsed, broken, and shattered. They called these things in German different things. I think it was repulsed, defeated, and totally defeated, I think were the exact terms used, but repulsed, broken, and shattered kind of makes more sense to me. So repulsed is just kind of a term for like you kind of ran away, but like you're basically still in the fight. Broken is at the point where like, okay, these guys aren't really in the fight anymore. And then shattered sort of expresses that like these guys probably aren't coming back to the fight, but like technically under the rules, if they were given that much of a recovery period, they could come back. And then I added my own state, which is surrendered, which would exist in an ad hoc measure under the Kriegsspiel rules, but there was no like formal state for it. There were also no official icons for any of these states, so I had to make my own. My first run at it was these icons here, and then I realized over a long time of umpiring with these icons that they looked kind of nice, but they weren't really readable from far away. The exclamation points are more readable from far away, so I switched to the exclamation points. The white flag is still readable from far. And then it also sort of lets the player know at a glance like how badly they're running away. They're not going to panic too much if they see this, but if they see broken or shattered, like that's really bad. When the unit enters the morale state, there's 2 periods. There's a period where they're running away, okay, and this period is the same length for any unit type. And what this means is that there's no fixed distance, right? If you're infantry, you're going to be running for this much time, which means you're running this far in terms of distance. And then there's a period afterwards where your unit stops running, but it won't go on the attack. And in most cases, this just means it's kind of sitting there. But basically, this sort of represents 2 different things, right? First of all, your units are totally psyched out, right? Psychologically speaking, they're in shock, or most of the unit is in shock. Most people are just going to be totally psyched out of being able to go on the offensive. They're not going to listen to orders during this period to go on attack. If you told them, hey, we're going to order a retreat, they would probably listen to that. Or if you wanted to move them somewhere else on the battlefield where they're not fighting, maybe they would listen to that. It's just sort of left up to the umpire's judgment. The only thing that's written expressly in the old rules is these units cannot go on the attack for however long the indicated period is. And it's the same system in Broken and Shattered. It's just the units of time stretch longer. And it's always sort of halfway. However long you run away, take that and add it again, and that's how long you're sort of sitting there like a duck. After this, it doesn't kind of like go down. A lot of people are familiar with Total War, so I'll use that as an example. Basically, in that game, you're in Shattered, and then your unit sort of, it runs away for however long it does, and then, instead of standing still, it goes down a step into Broken, and then it goes down a step into Repulsed. In this system, it doesn't do that. In this system, you are broken the whole time, and then you're just fine. Like you jump straight into you're fine. After you exit the broken state, you can go on the attack again, and basically act like you're a fresh unit, because we've gotten over whatever sort of loss you suffered. Okay, and so this tells us a few things, but basically, the Prussians thought that it was really important for their general staff to understand that you're not just vulnerable in the running away stage. I think most people understand, like, sort of intuitively, that if you got attacked while you were running away, it would be really bad, right? But what they wanted their generals to and their general staff to understand is that you're not just vulnerable when you're running away. There's actually a period shortly after when you stop running away that if you were attacked during this period, the effect on you would be as if you were attacked while running away. Right? So if these guys run and they run and they run and they stop, and then they're attacked pretty much immediately by a unit before they can sort of get their bearings, they're just going to be out of the count, basically. It's going to be a horrific massacre. They're going to break immediately. It's not going to be a fun time. And so that's what this second period is for. There's no formal state for, the differentiation between these two periods. It's just one long stretch, and the umpire was kind of expected to keep track of this. And that kind of leads into another thing I wanted to talk about, which is like the problems of administrating this after I've been using this system for a while. So I've got an example here, basically to show you how this would work in practice. This isn't a very realistic engagement, but let's just pretend for a moment. Okay, so these guys are shooting at these guys. This is going to be a pretty intense engagement, so they're both going to be heavily shaken, right? The distances are pretty short here. So they're both heavily shaken no matter what in this engagement. Does that apply to this morale roll that they're going to do, right? So what happens is there's a morale roll on a 1d6. And it's just one dice for the whole engagement that you don't roll for each side, just one dice to decide who breaks and who doesn't. And it's a binary thing. You don't both break at the same time. That doesn't exist under the rules. It's just one party breaks or the other. I guess, there are examples in history where both sides broke at the same time, but these are considered so fringe that basically it's not worth simulating, I guess, or the umpire could handle it on an ad hoc basis, right? You're writing rules for the vast majority of cases, and in the vast majority of cases, one side is going to break and the other is not. Okay, so you roll your dice, and then based on that, the dice will tell you, how badly you're broken based on the circumstances. Okay, and so what happens is the heavily shaken stuff, since that was just applied like while we were rolling this, we don't use that to change the roll. We would apply heavily shaken after this engagement, right? Or say they were heavily shaken coming into the engagement, then you would do the heavily shaken stuff. Even basically, you should consider this as like when these guys are leaving this engagement, now I gotta apply the shaken token, and I gotta apply the morale token, the routing token. So let's say that blue loses in this case, and he can be shaken or whatever. He can be repulsed, broken, or shattered, and there's a period of running away. Okay, so how long is the period of running away is kind of important, right? So repulsed, you route for 4 minutes, and then you're out of action for 20. Again, this is me like synthesizing rules that are just spread all over the place and don't really make much sense. I still need to tinker with this a little bit, because the wording here isn't really, it's not immediately apparent. You can kind of piece it together, but it's not the best wording. And so if you wonder why wargamers are constantly tinkering with their rules, it's stuff like this, right? So in the rules as I've written them, you might think that you're in the repulsed state for 14 minutes, but no, you're in the repulsed state for a total of 10 minutes. You're routing for 4 minutes, i.e. you're running away. That's what I mean by routing. And then you're sort of staying still, right? You can't attack for 6. And then in terms of broken, it's going to be running for 10, out of action for 10 more, and then for shattered, it's running for 16, out of action for another 16. Now, I don't know why repulsed specifically is so weird, where you're routing 4 and then out of action for 6. I think it's because of the 2-minute tick intervals. When they're processing the game, the Prussians process this in 2-minute ticks, right? So if you had it the same as all of the other systems, broken and shattered, it would be 5 and 5, right? You would be routing for 5, and then you'd be out of action for 5. But because they don't have 5 as a unit of time in Kriegsspiel, right? They only have even numbers. You can do 10, you can do 16, but you can't do 5. So they say, okay, well, we'll do 4, because we seem to think that, you're sort of reconstituting yourself for a lot longer, at least it feels like to us, than running away. So they do routing for 4, out of action for 6. But realistically, like, if you wanted to and you were running on 5-minute ticks, it would make perfect sense for you to disregard the exact number of 4 and 6 and just make it 5 and 5 and make it way easier for you to administrate. But I digress. The thing that I was wanting to say about this is that it becomes very difficult to administrate as the umpire, right? Because if I've got a bunch of different, morale states here, it becomes difficult to remember which ones are running away and for how much longer they have to run away, and which ones are, staying still. And, I'm not going to remember this, and writing it down, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It's not a very efficient way of going about things to remind me as the umpire, because I'm going to forget. And then it doesn't convey things very efficiently to the player either, because now I'm having to write things down in the description of the turn rather than relying on these tokens, which is what I like to do, right? If I use this token, for example, I don't really need to describe what this is. The player can sort of intuitively figure out, okay, we got the sound signal and we have an artillery gun. Oh, there must be the sound of an artillery gun over there, right? And then I don't need to sort of describe it. Or heavily shaken, like once they know what it is, they're gonna know, okay, my token is there, I'm tired right now. But if these tokens are here, right? If you only have one token for the entire morale state, now the player doesn't know whether their troops are still running or not, right? Because they have their view is this. They don't see whether they're actually moving or not. As the umpire, I know that people are moving, but they're getting a static image, so they don't really, right? They don't really see that they're running away or they're standing still, and then they have no sense of like how long it's going to last, right? It's going to depend on the morale state. It's also going to depend on how long your ticks are, or how long your turn decision points are, right? If it's 2 minutes, they could have to wait. In their propulsed state, they're going to have to wait 3 different screenshots before they can reliably send their troops back into battle. And then for broken, it's even longer. And shattered, it's even longer. Right now, I run my games with 10-minute ticks. That seems to be the sweet spot for sort of this period and scale of warfare. For medieval, I do 6 minutes because that seems to be the appropriate period of time. But like, the player has no idea, and I have no idea, right? If I come back to this 3 days later, right, or like next Friday or something, I look at this, I'm gonna have no idea whether these troops are running away or not. And yeah, it's just kind of a problem. So I'm like, okay, do I make like another token for like whether you're reconstituting yourself or not? But then I ran into the problem where I was already thinking of making a token for basically reconstituting yourself, and I think it would look something like this, to sort of illustrate that some kind of a process is ongoing. It's kind of like a loading symbol almost. If you've got 10-minute ticks and you're ordering your guys to go into a battle line like this, it's going to take at least to probably 3 turns before the player sees that their guys are lined up. And if I have to give updates in the meantime, the player is going to be wondering like, what the heck is happening? And if I can put a token that looks kind of like this, like some kind of loading symbol, now the player knows, okay, we still got more time. We still got more time to go. This is taking a while. Something to indicate that time is passing. I don't know whether you would have like a 1 or a 2 or a 3. I don't know about that, or whether that would be useful or even visible, but definitely at least something like this. And then another thing is like, after the attack, after these guys run away, these guys can't attack in an orderly fashion right away. So, they would have this whole thing as well. And then that could kind of like indicate, like, if you're ordering stuff while this is going on, you're going to have a bad time and something bad is going to happen, basically. So, like, let your troops, rest. I don't think this would last more than a turn after the assault there, but the Prussians themselves talked about this. They talked about, oh my god, after this big assault, this is in my example game video, but there was an assault in Langenhof where red came through here and then blue counterattacked, and basically the Empire was like, yeah, red shouldn't have been able to really defend in good order here because they had just assaulted, and it's going to take them like at least 20 minutes to reconstitute after the battle. So in his opinion, it could take 2 of my turns to reconstitute these guys. And technically you could order them to do stuff. It's just, it's gonna be kind of a disaster for them. So that was kind of where my mind is going in terms of like, units reconstituting themselves, going into formation, maybe also indicating that these guys are reforming after running away, and then at least the player knows that their guys aren't running away anymore, and I'll know that as well, so I can delete it. And then also another thing that's a problem with this, maybe you've noticed already, is, okay, so I mark these guys as repulsed, right? And then they run for 4 minutes, okay? And then they kind of stand still for 6 minutes.
but my tick is 10 minutes. Like at the end of the 10-minute turn, the repulse marker should be gone, but then if I don't include it, how will the player know at a glance that their troops, like the reason that they're back here is because they ran away? And then I run into the problem of having to write things down and explain myself with a description again. So I don't know. This is a problem that I'm struggling with. In terms of like best practices right now, I definitely think the 3 exclamation point system works. Highly considering this sort of loading symbol. And then, yeah, I don't know. It seems like there should be some indicator for like you're not running away anymore, or maybe there's an indicator for running away, and then we just get rid of it when you're not running away. I don't know. I'm not sure what the best way to solve this problem is. It seems like there needs to be some sort of indication for like these sub states, right? Are you in this state of the route, or are you in this state of the route? Because based on that, like, I'm going to get rid of this within a single turn. This is going to go away in a turn, and this is going to go away in like a turn and a half. This has been very long-winded and complicated, but trust me, this is the simpler version compared to reading the actual Kriegsspiel rules, which are just all over the place. Not the best user experience. They're very well designed rules, but in terms of like understanding them, anyways, I'm John Greenwood. I've been ranting a while, so I'm just gonna cut to black. Take care.